Sunlight glitters across a sea of golden mosaics in the great palace of Constantinople. This was the dazzling heart of the Byzantine Empire, a realm that lasted for over 1,000 years. It was a world of profound faith and staggering wealth, where emperors were seen as God's own representatives on earth. Yet behind the sacred icons and the shimmering silk, a far more ruthless game was always being played. How did a court so famous for its piety become an even greater byword for betrayal and political murder? This is the story of the Byzantine Court, a real-life Game of Thrones with even higher stakes, where theological debates could be as deadly as any sword. By the end, you will understand the hidden rules that governed this labyrinth of power and discover who truly held the reins of an empire. We will uncover how an empress could rule from the shadows and why a trusted bodyguard might suddenly decide an emperor's fate. In a world where a whisper could topple a throne, who would you have trusted? The city of Constantinople was more than just a capital. It was a statement carved in stone and gold. Its legendary triple line of defenses, the Theodosian walls, were considered the strongest in the world, a physical barrier that made the city seem divinely protected. Yet these immense fortifications also created a sealed world, a pressure cooker where political ambitions had nowhere to escape but inward. Within these walls, the stage for power was set in two key locations. The sprawling Great Palace complex was a city within the city, a labyrinth of throne rooms, chapels, and private apartments where the emperor and his court lived. Here, politics was a whispered art conducted in corridors and gardens. Just a short distance away stood the Hippodrome, a colossal racetrack that could hold tens of thousands of citizens. This was where the emperor faced the public, where the roars of the crowd for their favorite chariot racing teams could transform in an instant into roars of political approval or furious dissent. The fate of an emperor often hinged on the mood of the Hippodrome, and this city was worth fighting for because it controlled the threads of global commerce. Perched on the narrow strait of the Bosporus, Constantinople sat directly astride the trade routes linking the rich East with the markets of Europe. Every spice from Asia, every bolt of silk from China, and every shipment of grain from Egypt had to pass its gates, filling the imperial treasury with unimaginable wealth. To control this city was to control the economic lifeblood of the known world. A prize so magnificent it made every conspiracy, every betrayal, and every dark plot seem a risk worth taking. This throne was not merely a seat of power, it was the center of the universe. The man who occupied it, the Basileus, was far more than a king. He was seen as God's own vicegerent on earth, the living bridge between the divine and the human realm. His authority was absolute and all-encompassing. He commanded the armies, he appointed the patriarchs of the church, and his word was the final law for a vast and intricate bureaucracy that stretched from Italy to the borders of Persia. To challenge the emperor was not just treason, it was considered a form of sacrilege, and the wealth that came with this sacred office was almost beyond comprehension. The empire controlled the global silk trade, a monopoly so lucrative it was guarded as a state secret. Then there was the solidus, the empire's gold coin. For centuries, this coin was so pure and reliable that it was the standard currency across 3 continents, the dollar of the medieval world. This unshakable financial power filled the imperial treasuries, funding magnificent building projects and a lavish court ceremony designed to overwhelm any visitor with its display of divine favor and immense riches. To be the Basileus was to wield absolute spiritual and temporal power while sitting atop the greatest fortune of the age. Is it any wonder that so many were willing to do anything, to betray anyone for a chance to claim that ultimate prize? Yet the emperor never ruled entirely alone. While his authority appeared absolute, a powerful figure often stood just a step behind the throne, operating from the private world of the women's quarters, the Iconoclasm. This was the domain of the Byzantine Empress, a role far more potent than the title of mere consort might suggest. Consider the legendary Theodora, wife of the great Emperor Justinian I. She began her life as an actress, a profession considered so disreputable it should have barred her from any high station. Yet she rose to become the emperor's most vital partner, a co-ruler in all but name. During the Nika riots, when the city was in flames and Justinian's advisors were urging him to flee for his life, it was Theodora who stood firm. Her famous, defiant speech convinced him to stay and fight, a decision that saved his reign and reshaped the empire. Her influence was not confined to moments of crisis. Empresses like her were master political strategists. They controlled vast networks of informants and patronage, directing the flow of money and favors to strengthen their own faction and undermine their rivals. They played a direct role in shaping religious policy, a matter of life and death in a court where a theological disagreement could lead to exile or execution. An empress could champion a particular saint or doctrine, swaying the emperor and the entire church with her counsel. From the seclusion of the gyneconitis, she could orchestrate marriages, secure promotions for loyal generals, and discreetly remove obstacles to her power. The right word from an empress could calm a furious mob or ignite one. She could secure her husband's legacy, or, if she chose, she could be the hidden hand that unraveled it entirely. The throne was the symbol of power, but the influence to truly wield it often flowed from the quarters beside it. But the emperor and his empress could not rule this vast empire alone. Their will was executed through a colossal engine of power, the imperial bureaucracy. This was a labyrinth of officials and departments so complex it could make even the grandest palace seem simple. At its theoretical peak sat the Senate, a body of the empire's wealthiest and most powerful men. Their role was mostly ceremonial by the middle period of the empire, a prestigious club that legitimized the emperor's rule, yet they still represented the powerful aristocratic families whose support no emperor could afford to lose. The real work of governing was done by a host of specialized and often shadowy officials. The Praetorian prefect, for instance, was once a military commander but evolved into the empire's chief administrator, controlling everything from law and order to the food supply and the vast network of public roads. Then there were the logothetes, the accountants. These men were the masters of the imperial purse, responsible for tax collection and treasury accounts. Their title literally means one who calculates, and their calculations could make or break a regime. This administrative machine was the glue that held the empire together for over 1,000 years. It collected the taxes that paid the armies, it managed the grain that fed the capital, and it transmitted the emperor's commands to the farthest provinces. Yet this very same system was also a perfect hotbed for conspiracy. Ambitious officials did not need to wield a sword to seize power. A logothete could quietly divert funds to bribe the palace guard. A Praetorian prefect could deliberately mismanage the grain supply to stir up public unrest against the emperor. Most potent of all was the control of information. In a world without instant communication, the officials who controlled the reports and dispatches reaching the emperor's eyes effectively controlled his perception of reality. They could delay a crucial message about a rebellion, exaggerate a minor threat to discredit a rival, or simply bury an inconvenient truth in a mountain of paperwork. An emperor might believe he was sitting securely on his throne, completely unaware that the very administrators he relied on were quietly orchestrating his downfall from their desks. In the Byzantine court, the most dangerous weapon was often not a dagger, but a carefully edited ledger. Yet even the most intricate bureaucracy needed a clear line of succession, a rulebook for who could rightfully claim the ultimate prize. In this world of sacred power, legitimacy was not just a matter of blood, it was a matter of color, specifically the color purple. A child born to a reigning emperor in the special porphyra chamber of the Great Palace was given a title that echoed through the ages, Porphyrogenitos, meaning born in the purple. This was not just a poetic nickname. The chamber itself was lined with rare purple porphyry stone, a color so expensive and difficult to produce that it was reserved exclusively for the imperial family. To be born there was to be marked by divinity from your very first breath. It created an unbreakable link between the child and the throne, a bloodline sanctified by God and imperial tradition. This status was the highest form of political capital one could possess. A Porphyrogenitos prince was considered the most legitimate heir, a living symbol of dynastic continuity whose claim could silence rivals and unite the court. But this immense privilege was also a gilded cage. Imagine the pressure on a child raised with the constant, crushing knowledge that they were destined for a throne that countless others were scheming to seize. Their entire life was a performance, every action scrutinized for signs of weakness or unworthiness. And this system, designed to ensure stability, often produced the exact opposite. A Porphyrogenitos infant could be proclaimed emperor, but an infant cannot rule. This created a power vacuum that regents, powerful generals, and even their own family members fought viciously to fill. Ambitious uncles or older brothers who had been born before their father ascended the throne and were therefore not purple-born found themselves brutally sidelined. They were often forced into monasteries, blinded to make them ineligible for rule, or worse. The very concept meant to solidify a dynasty could tear it apart from the inside, pitting brother against brother and mother against son in a silent, desperate war fought within the palace walls. The color purple promised a smooth succession, but it almost always guaranteed a hidden struggle for the soul of the empire itself. But the authority of the throne and the cunning of the court were not the only forces shaping the empire. In this deeply religious society, the line between the palace and the pulpit was often invisible. The emperor may have been God's representative, but he had a partner and sometimes a rival in the Patriarch of Constantinople. This was not a simple alliance of church and state. It was a complex and often tense dance for the soul of the empire itself. The emperor appointed the patriarch, and in theory, the patriarch was subordinate to the imperial will. Yet a patriarch commanded something the emperor could only dream of: direct and unquestioned access to the faith of millions. He could bless a ruler, or he could withhold that blessing, and in doing so, he could shatter an emperor's divine legitimacy overnight. This relationship turned theology into high-stakes politics. The great Iconoclasm controversy is a perfect example. For over a century, emperors waged a war on religious icons, ordering the destruction of holy images across the empire. On the surface, this was a fierce theological debate about whether such images constituted idolatry. But look deeper and you see a brutal power struggle. By attacking icons, these emperors were attempting to seize total control over the spiritual life of their subjects, breaking the independent power of monasteries and clergy who revered the images. It was a direct attempt to centralize religious authority entirely within the palace. The conflict tore the empire in two, leading to riots, executions, and the widespread persecution of those who defended the icons. Emperors fell and patriarchs were deposed over this single issue, proving that a question of faith could be as destabilizing as a foreign invasion. An emperor's power was measured not just by his armies, but by his ability to dictate what people believed. Yet the patriarch was far from a passive player. A shrewd patriarch could become the ultimate kingmaker. He was the one who placed the crown on the emperor's head during the coronation, a public act that signaled divine approval. If a new emperor seized power through a coup or assassination, it was the patriarch's coronation that transformed him from a usurper into God's anointed. This gave the patriarch immense leverage. He could negotiate for greater church autonomy, for funds to build magnificent new cathedrals, or for influence over imperial policy. But if an emperor pushed too far, a patriarch could also become the leader of a rebellion. By excommunicating an emperor or simply by refusing to celebrate Mass with him, a patriarch could signal to the entire populace that God's favor had been withdrawn. This could galvanize the Senate, the people, and the army to rise up. In the Byzantine world, faith was the ultimate political currency, and the patriarch controlled the mint. The struggle between the palace and the patriarchate was a constant, silent war fought with sermons and sacraments instead of swords, a war where the prize was nothing less than the conscience of an empire. In the shadows of the great palace, beneath the glittering mosaics and sacred rituals, thrived a silent industry of whispers. This was the domain of the spymaster, a figure who understood that in Byzantium, a secret was more powerful than a legion. The most effective of these shadowy operators were often the cubicularioi, the powerful eunuchs of the imperial bedchamber. Their unique position granted them constant, intimate access to the emperor, while their perceived lack of dynastic ambition made them seem like safe, loyal instruments. In reality, they were the perfect spymasters. They controlled the flow of people and information into the emperor's private quarters, and they commanded a vast network of agents that stretched across the empire. These agents were not just soldiers or officials. They were merchants in the marketplace, priests in the great cathedral, and even servants in the homes of powerful senators. They were the empire's eyes and ears, listening for the faintest hint of dissent or conspiracy. Their mission was simple: to gather the one currency that truly mattered: information. They intercepted letters, bribed courtiers for gossip, and compiled detailed dossiers of blackmail on anyone of importance. A general's financial troubles, a senator's secret love affair, a bishop's unorthodox religious views, all of these were carefully recorded and stored away, ready to be used as leverage at a moment's notice. In this world, knowledge was not just power, it was a weapon. A well-timed whisper in the emperor's ear could destroy a rival's reputation or elevate an obscure clerk to a position of immense authority. This system bred a culture of profound paranoia. How could you trust your closest friend when he might be reporting your every private word to the cubicularios? How could you plan a political maneuver when you knew a single misplaced comment could see you exiled by morning? This constant, low-grade fear was not a bug in the system, it was a feature. An emperor surrounded by potential rivals needed to know everything, and the spymaster's network ensured that no plot, however carefully hidden, could long remain a secret. To survive in the Byzantine court, you needed more than loyalty or ambition. You needed an almost supernatural sense of caution because the walls themselves had ears. But even the most intricate web of spies needed a final, unbreakable line of defense. This role fell to the most unlikely of figures, towering northern warriors whose foreign tongues and pagan pasts made them the ultimate outsiders in the sophisticated Byzantine court. They were the Varangian Guard, the emperor's personal protectors, recruited from the fierce Norse and later, the battle-hardened Anglo-Saxons. Their loyalty was legendary, but it was a loyalty that was carefully purchased. They received immense salaries paid in pure gold and silver, wealth that could make a man a king back in his frozen homeland. They were granted immense prestige, the right to march directly beside the emperor in ceremonies and to be the first into battle. Their presence was a constant, visible symbol of the emperor's power and his reach across the known world. Yet this loyalty had a price, and it was not unconditional. It was loyalty to the office of the emperor and to the gold that paid them, not always to the man who temporarily held the throne. This distinction made them not just bodyguards but potential kingmakers. There is no clearer example of this grim reality than the fate of Emperor Romanos IV. After a disastrous military defeat, Romanos was captured, then ransomed and returned to Constantinople, only to find his throne had been seized by a rival. As he attempted to rally support, it was the Varangian Guard who were sent to capture him. They did not simply arrest the fallen emperor. On the orders of the new regime, they carried out a horrifying act. They blinded him, a mutilation that rendered him permanently ineligible to rule according to Byzantine law. The very men sworn to protect the emperor's person became the instruments of his ultimate political destruction. In that brutal moment, the Guard demonstrated a chilling truth. They were the final arbiters of power, a physical force that could enforce the outcome of any palace conspiracy. An emperor might believe he controlled the Varangians, but if the tide of politics turned, their axes would always fall on the side of the victor. They were the empire's steel fist, a reminder that in the end, all the theological debates and bureaucratic maneuvering could be rendered meaningless by the simple, brutal loyalty of hired blades. That ultimate prize, the throne of the Byzantines, was a siren call that could tempt even the most unlikely of men. In the middle of the 9th century, the empire was ruled by Michael III, a man known to history by the unflattering nickname, the Drunkard. His court was a place of wild parties and erratic decisions, a dangerous environment where a man of low birth but immense ambition could find his opening. That man was Basil, a peasant from Macedonia who arrived in Constantinople with nothing but his physical strength and a ruthless determination to rise. He caught the emperor's eye, reportedly after winning a wrestling match, and was brought into the imperial service. Michael III showered his new favorite with titles and honors, eventually making Basil his chief minister and even naming him co-emperor, a gesture meant to secure the succession. But for Basil, sharing power was not enough. The man who had been lifted from the mud by the emperor's favor now saw his patron as the final obstacle to absolute control. One night in the year 867, as Michael III lay sleeping in the palace after a feast, Basil and a small band of his most trusted accomplices entered the bedchamber. They murdered the emperor who had given Basil everything, stabbing him to death in the very place he should have been safest. It was a shocking act of betrayal, a raw demonstration that in the Byzantine court, gratitude was a weakness and ambition was the only true virtue. From this bloody act, Basil I founded the Macedonian dynasty, a line of rulers that would go on to preside over one of the most glorious periods in Byzantine history, a golden age of military conquest and cultural flourishing. The dynasty he forged in the blood of his friend and benefactor would last for nearly 200 years, its legitimacy built entirely on a single, brutal murder. This paradox lies at the very heart of the Byzantine political mystery. How could such a horrific crime produce not chaos but a celebrated and stable era? The answer is that Basil understood the unspoken rules of the game. He did not just seize power, he immediately set about legitimizing it. He married his children into the old imperial family. He became a great patron of the church, and he presented himself as a strong, pious ruler who had saved the empire from a debauched and incompetent leader. The court, the army, and the people were often willing to overlook the violence of a usurper if he could provide the stability and glory they craved. The rise of Basil I was not an anomaly, it was a blueprint. It taught every ambitious general and scheming courtier that the path to the purple was open to anyone with the nerve to reach for it, no matter how humble their origins. It proved that the throne belonged not necessarily to the man born in the purple chamber, but to the man ruthless enough to claim it and shrewd enough to make the empire forget how he had done it. The most powerful man in the empire was not the man who wore the crown. For decades, the real ruler of Byzantium was a eunuch named Basil Lekapenos, the illegitimate son of an emperor who had never been meant to rule himself. His official title was Parakoimamenos, the Grand Chamberlain, a role that placed him in charge of the emperor's private bedchamber. It sounds like a humble job, a glorified servant, but in the Byzantine court, controlling the door to the emperor's room meant controlling the empire. This was the ultimate position of trust and access, and Basil Lekapenos exploited it to its fullest. He was the gatekeeper, Every petition, every report, every visitor who wished to see the young Emperor Constantine VII had to go through him first. He decided what information reached the emperor's ears and what was quietly lost. He controlled the imperial schedule, the flow of favors, and the appointments to every high office. He was, in effect, the master of reality for the man who was supposed to be the master of the world. But his power did not stop at the bedroom door. This eunuch also held the keys to the treasury. He took on the role of the empire's chief financial minister, personally overseeing the vast revenues that flowed into Constantinople. He knew the financial secrets of every aristocrat, every general, and every bishop. He knew who was in debt and who was hoarding wealth, and he used this knowledge not just to fill the imperial coffers, but to ensure that no one could accumulate enough private power to challenge his own. For over 30 years, this was the true structure of power. The Emperor Constantine VII was a Porphyrogenitos, a scholar, a man born to the purple who wrote elegant books on court ceremony and imperial rule. Yet he reigned while his uncle, the eunuch, actually ruled. Basil Lekapenos directed military campaigns, negotiated with foreign powers, and shaped domestic policy, all from his position just beside the throne. He was the living proof that the formal hierarchy of the Byzantine court was a grand illusion. The true path to power was not through a royal birth or a military victory, but through the quiet, patient, and total control of the mechanisms of government. He showed that a man who could never legally become emperor could nonetheless command the obedience of those who could, making the sacred emperor a virtual prisoner in his own palace, a figurehead whose every command was first approved by the uncle who held the keys to his chamber and his gold. Anna Komnene was born not just into royalty, but into a destiny she believed was hers by right. As the eldest child of the formidable Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, she was given an education that was unparalleled for any woman of her time, a true philosopher queen trained in rhetoric, medicine, and history. Her father reportedly doted on her, and for a brief, glorious moment she was married to the Porphyrogenitos heir, a union that seemed to place her directly in the path to ultimate power. But that destiny shattered with the birth of her brother John. Suddenly, the male heir took precedence, and Anna's world of intellectual promise and political proximity became a gilded cage. She could not accept this. For her, the throne was not just a prize, it was the logical conclusion of her birth, her education, and her capabilities. Her brother John was a soldier, a man of action, but Anna saw herself as the true inheritor of her father's legacy, the one who could guide the empire with a philosopher's wisdom. So she began to plot, turning the very tools of her education into weapons of conspiracy. Her primary weapon was her mother, the Empress Irene. Together, they formed a powerful faction within the women's quarters, a shadow court that worked tirelessly to undermine the young Emperor John. They delayed his coronation, they spread rumors questioning his competence, and they poured their considerable wealth into bribing key officials and military commanders, attempting to build a coalition that would support Anna's claim. The plot reached its climax during Emperor Alexios' final, fatal illness. As the emperor lay dying, Anna and her mother kept John from his bedside, hoping their rival would be absent at the crucial moment of death, allowing them to seize control of the palace and declare Anna the new empress. But their plan was foiled by another woman's loyalty. John's sister, another Anna, discovered the conspiracy and raced to her brother's side, helping him to literally fight his way through the palace guards to reach their father's body. With that single, desperate act, John secured his legitimacy and his throne. The aftermath for Anna Komnene was a life of quiet, brilliant confinement. She was not executed or blinded, the usual fate of failed usurpers. Instead, she was forced to retire to a monastery, the Ketcheritomene, which had been founded by her mother. Stripped of all political power, she turned her immense intellect to a different kind of immortality. It was within those monastic walls that she wrote the Alexiad, a magnificent history of her father's reign. This was not just a daughter's tribute, it was a subtle, final act of political defiance. In its pages, she could shape the narrative of the empire, immortalizing her own perspective and ensuring that her voice, if not her rule, would echo through the centuries. Her story is a haunting testament to the brutal limits placed on even the most brilliant and ambitious women in Byzantium. She had every qualification to rule: intelligence, education, lineage, and a burning desire for power. Yet the system, built entirely around male succession, had no permanent place for her. Her life became a profound contradiction, a career of political failure that produced one of the medieval world's greatest literary achievements, a permanent monument to the empire she was never allowed to lead. A rival's death could create a martyr, but a living, mutilated enemy was a far more potent political symbol. This chilling logic gave rise to one of the most brutal and calculated practices of the Byzantine court, the systematic maiming of political opponents. The most common and decisive act was blinding, often carried out with a red-hot iron. This was not merely an act of cruelty, it was a precise political tool. Byzantine religious and legal tradition held that a person with a severe physical imperfection could not be God's representative on earth, and thus could not occupy the imperial throne. By blinding a rival, you did not just punish him, you permanently erased his eligibility for power, neutralizing the threat without the spiritual stain of murder. It was considered a so-called merciful alternative to execution, allowing the victim to live while ensuring his political life was utterly extinguished. The case of Emperor Romanos IV, blinded by the very Varangian Guard he once commanded, stands as a stark testament to this grim practice, but the repertoire of neutralization did not end there. Castration was another method used, particularly on potential rivals from the imperial family. A eunuch, by definition, could not found a dynasty. He could hold immense power as a minister or a general, as Basil Lekapenos proved, but he could never legally claim the throne for himself or pass it to a son. This made castration a way to sideline ambitious princes, turning them into politically neutered figures who could be used for their administrative talents without posing a direct threat to the ruling line. A less severe but equally symbolic punishment was the slitting of the nose, a permanent facial disfigurement meant to mar the handsome, godlike image an emperor was required to project. A man with a mutilated face was visibly, publicly unfit for the purple. These acts were performed with cold, bureaucratic efficiency, transforming the human body into a canvas for political statements. A blinded ex-emperor could be displayed in a monastery, a living lesson on the cost of failure. A castrated prince could be given a high office, a constant reminder of the limits of his ambition. This system of calculated maiming reveals the cold, pragmatic heart of Byzantine power politics. It was a world where preserving a life could be more strategic than taking one, where mercy and cruelty were not opposites but two sides of the same blood-stained coin. The greatest threat to the Byzantine court often arrived not from within its gilded corridors, but from a familiar and unexpected quarter, its supposed allies. The year 1204 stands as a permanent scar in the empire's long history, the moment a holy mission of liberation turned into the most devastating act of betrayal. An army of Western Crusaders, originally bound for Egypt to fight for Christendom, found itself camped outside the walls of Constantinople, not as guests but as a hostile force. The chain of events that led to this catastrophe was a perfect storm of Byzantine political intrigue and Western ambition. It began with a palace coup that deposed the Emperor Isaac II Angelos, who was blinded and imprisoned by his own brother. Isaac's son, a young prince also named Alexios, fled to the west and made a desperate offer to the Crusader leaders. He promised them a colossal sum of money, military support, and the submission of the Eastern Church to the Pope if they would help him restore his father to the throne. For the cash-strapped Crusaders, drowning in debt to the Venetian fleet that transported them, this was an offer they could not refuse. they turned their entire army toward Constantinople, the very heart of the Christian East they were supposedly allied with. When they arrived, they installed the young prince as co-emperor Alexios IV. But the new emperor quickly discovered that the imperial treasury was empty, and he could not possibly pay the immense sum he had promised. The city itself grew restless and resentful of the arrogant Western soldiers camped at its gates and their puppet emperor. Within months, a palace official named Alexios Doukas led a popular uprising, overthrowing and strangling the young Alexios IV. He took the throne as Alexios V, and he immediately refused to honor his predecessor's crippling debts to the Crusaders. This was the final provocation. On the 13th of April, 1204, the Crusader army unleashed a full-scale assault on the city that had stood impregnable for 900 years. They breached the sea walls, and for 3 days they subjected Constantinople to an orgy of destruction unlike anything it had ever seen. Ancient statues were melted down for their bronze, holy relics were looted from the churches, and the great library of Constantinople was set ablaze. The magnificent Hagia Sophia, the spiritual center of the empire, was stripped of its gold and silver and desecrated. The Crusaders crowned one of their own, Count Baldwin of Flanders, as the new Latin emperor of Constantinople, while the legitimate Byzantine court splintered and fled, establishing rival empires in exile in places like Nicaea and Trebizond. The empire was shattered not by a foreign invader of a different faith, but by fellow Christians, enabled by the very internal rivalries and betrayals that had always been the court's greatest weakness. The Fourth Crusade is the ultimate lesson in the peril of inviting a wolf into your house to settle a dispute with your own family. The wolf, once inside, will always turn on the host. That carefully planned conspiracy, the one that unfolded in whispers and secret meetings, always followed a brutal logic. To successfully remove an emperor from the very heart of his power required a meticulous 10-step dance of betrayal, a dark art perfected over centuries within the palace walls. The first non-negotiable step was securing the ultimate trump card, the loyalty of the military force closest to the throne. A conspirator's very first meeting was often with the commander of the Varangian Guard or with a trusted general of the Tagmata, the elite garrison regiment stationed in and around the capital. This was not a conversation about ideals, it was a transaction. The plotters had to offer a better deal than the current emperor, a promise of vast sums of gold, higher ranks, and guaranteed privileges after the deed was done. Without the men who held the axes and the swords, any plot was just empty talk, doomed to fail at the first sign of resistance. Next, the conspiracy had to reach into the very machinery of the state. The plotters needed allies within the bureaucracy, a sympathetic praetorian prefect who could ensure the city's administration remained calm, or a logothete who could quietly redirect funds to finance the uprising. Perhaps even more crucial was the support, or at least the silent acquiescence of the patriarch. A nod from the church could provide a veneer of divine approval, transforming a bloody coup into a necessary change ordained by God. With the swords and the administrators on their side, the conspirators then began the delicate work of isolation. They would use their positions to slowly cut the emperor off from reality. Loyal advisors would be discredited and sent away on fictitious missions. Alarming reports from the provinces would be delayed or rewritten to seem trivial. The emperor, surrounded by smiling faces, would be led to believe all was well, even as the net was tightening around him. The final strike was always timed for a moment of maximum vulnerability. A religious festival that distracted the city, a late-night banquet where the emperor's guard was lowered, or better yet, a period of serious illness that left him weak and confined to his bedchamber. In that vulnerable hour, the conspirators would make their move. The bribed guards would open the palace gates and the armed men would move in. The emperor would be confronted not with a foreign army, but with the cold, familiar faces of his own ministers and protectors. The final act was a grim choice presented as a mercy. the emperor would be forced to abdicate, often by taking monastic vows on the spot, his head shaved in a tonsure that symbolically severed his link to the secular world. This was the cleanest outcome, a peaceful transition that avoided the spiritual stain of murder. But if the emperor resisted, or if his mere existence was too great a threat to the new regime, the conspiracy ended with a blade in the dark. The entire process, from the first whispered promise of gold to the final forced oath or fatal blow, was a chillingly efficient political machine. It proved that the greatest danger to a Byzantine emperor was never a foreign invasion, but the quiet, calculated betrayal of the very people he trusted to keep him safe. Every public moment in the Great Palace was a meticulously staged performance of power. The emperor did not simply walk into a room, he processed in a blaze of light and sound, his path lined with golden organs and choirs singing his praises. This was not mere pomp, it was a vital form of political communication, a language everyone in the court was required to understand and speak with their bodies. The most profound word in this language was the act of proskynesis, the full prostration. To approach the throne, a general who commanded thousands, a senator from an ancient family, even a foreign ambassador, had to cast themselves face down on the floor before the elevated figure of the basileus. This was not just a bow, it was a physical declaration that the person prostrating was nothing and the emperor was everything. It reinforced the cosmic hierarchy with every groveling gesture. Even the clothes you wore were a political statement. The type and color of the silk robes granted to you by the emperor were a precise indicator of your rank and his favor. A certain shade of purple or a specific pattern woven with gold thread could elevate a courtier above his rivals, while a plainer, older tunic could signal a sudden, dangerous fall from grace. Your entire identity at court was a message dictated from the throne. This theatrical control extended far beyond the palace walls. The emperor's face was everywhere, stamped on every gold solidus that passed from hand to hand across 3 continents. On these coins, he was never shown as old, weak, or human. He was depicted in his prime, crowned by Christ, holding the symbols of divine authority, a permanent reminder of his God-given right to rule. The monumental architecture of the city served the same purpose. The towering dome of the Hagia Sophia was not just a church, it was a statement in stone, a representation of heaven on earth with the emperor at its center. When a foreign envoy walked through the city, past the colossal statues and down the vast column-lined avenues, he was meant to feel overwhelmed, to understand that he was in the presence of a power that was both eternal and superhuman. The court ceremony, the art, and the very coins in your pocket all told the same story, a story of an invincible empire and an emperor chosen by God. This was the ultimate propaganda machine, and it ran every single day. This perceived flaw was in fact the very source of their immense power. Because a eunuch could never legally found his own dynasty or pass the throne to a son, he was seen as a safe investment. He could be trusted with the empire's most sensitive secrets and its greatest treasures, because his ambitions were thought to be channeled into service, not a bid for the crown itself. This allowed them to occupy a unique and powerful third gender in the court, operating outside the traditional rivalries of noble families and military factions. They became the ultimate insiders, the permanent civil service of the empire. Their influence began at the most intimate level within the imperial bedchamber. As the cubicularioi, they controlled who saw the emperor and when. They decided which petitions reached his desk and which were lost forever. A general seeking a promotion, a bishop wanting a favor, or an ambassador delivering a message all had to go through the eunuch at the door. This gatekeeping role gave them the power to make or break careers with a single, quiet decision. But their authority did not stop at the bedroom, they commanded armies. The great general Narses, a eunuch, led the Byzantine forces to a decisive victory over the Ostrogoths in Italy, proving their strategic brilliance on the battlefield. They governed vast provinces as patricians, bringing imperial law to distant lands. Most importantly, they controlled the money. The most powerful eunuchs often held the title of secularios, the keeper of the imperial treasury. They knew the financial status of every aristocrat, every general, and every department. They decided how much gold went to the army, how much to build a new church, and how much to fund a secret network of spies. This combination of access, military command, and financial control made them the most trusted and often the most treacherous figures in the empire. A loyal eunuch like Basil Lekapenos could effectively rule for decades, holding the state together with unmatched administrative skill. But a disloyal one could become the most dangerous conspirator of all. He did not need to plot to become emperor himself. Instead, he could use his unparalleled access to identify a pliable candidate, a general or a prince, and then orchestrate a coup to place his own puppet on the throne, ruling from the shadows while his chosen figurehead wore the crown. Their power was a double-edged sword, a testament to the Byzantine belief that the safest man to trust with absolute power was the one who could never legally claim it for himself. The roar of the hippodrome was the true voice of the people, a sound that could either crown an emperor or tear him from his throne. This colossal arena was far more than a sports stadium. It was the political heart of Constantinople, where the city's deepest passions and most dangerous ambitions were channeled through two primary colors, blue and green. What began as simple fan clubs for chariot racing teams, the Blues and the Greens, quickly morphed into something far more potent, full-blown political parties with their own private armies, funding, and agendas. The factions provided a sense of identity and community in a vast, impersonal city. A baker might be a green, while the merchant he bought flour from was a blue. These loyalties dictated friendships, business deals, and even marriages, but their power extended far beyond the racetrack. The leaders of the Blues and Greens commanded organized militias that could brawl in the streets, intimidate officials, and sway public opinion on everything from tax policy to religious doctrine. An emperor had to constantly manage these groups, favoring one to weaken the other, buying their loyalty with privileges and gold, all while knowing their alliance could turn against him in an instant. This precarious balance shattered in the year 532 during the reign of Justinian I. It started with a protest at the hippodrome. The Blues and the Greens, usually bitter rivals, found a common cause, their fury directed at Justinian's heavy-handed ministers and his oppressive tax policies. Their coordinated chants of Nika, meaning conquer or win, quickly escalated from a sporting cheer to a revolutionary battle cry. The hippodrome became their fortress, and the city descended into an inferno of rebellion. For 5 days, Constantinople burned as the united factions rampaged through the streets, proclaiming a new emperor and trapping Justinian and his court inside the great palace. The situation seemed hopeless, with advisors begging the emperor to flee the city. It was in this moment of absolute crisis that the famous defiance of Empress Theodora proved decisive. Her refusal to run, her declaration that royalty made a fine shroud, steeled Justinian's resolve. His generals, Belisarius and Mundus, then carried out a plan of breathtaking brutality. They sealed the exits of the hippodrome and sent their loyal soldiers inside. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. Tens of thousands of trapped rioters, blue and green alike, were cut down where they stood. The Nika revolt was drowned in blood, but its lesson was seared into the memory of every emperor who followed. It demonstrated that the most lethal threat to the throne was not a foreign army or a palace conspiracy, but the organized fury of the common people, a fire that could be ignited in the stands of the hippodrome and could consume an entire empire. An emperor's most trusted advisor was often the architect of his own destruction. This paradox lies at the heart of the imperial court, where a brilliant mind could be elevated to the highest echelons of power, only to discover that the closer you stand to the throne, the more precarious your footing becomes. Consider the story of John the Orphanatrophos, a man whose very name meant warden of the orphans, yet whose political cunning was anything but charitable. He was the brother of Emperor Michael IV, a member of the powerful Paphlagonian family that rose from obscurity to command the empire. John was the brains behind the operation, a master administrator and strategist who guided his brother's every move. He reformed the tax system, filling the imperial coffers with ruthless efficiency. He managed the complex bureaucracy with a surgeon's precision, and he expertly neutralized political rivals before they could even form a coherent plot. For a time, he was the indispensable man, the power behind the curtain who made the emperor look like a genius, but this was the advisor's fatal trap. As John's influence grew, so did his network of loyalists. He placed his own men in key positions throughout the army and the civil service. He controlled the flow of information so completely that the emperor began to hear only what his brother wanted him to hear. The court, the capital, and even foreign ambassadors came to understand that real power did not reside with the ailing Michael IV, but with his shrewd and ever-present brother. John had become the shadow emperor, and in doing so, he signed his own political death warrant. The very power he accumulated to protect his brother's reign now made him the single greatest threat to it. An emperor, no matter how indebted, could never tolerate a subject who rivaled his own authority. The moment the scales tipped and the advisor's influence began to eclipse the monarch's, the relationship was doomed. For John the Orphanatrophos, the end came when he orchestrated the succession, placing his own nephew, Michael V, on the throne after his brother's death. He believed he could continue to rule as the power behind a new, younger emperor. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The new emperor, feeling suffocated by his uncle's control, moved swiftly to assert his own independence. John was suddenly arrested, his vast properties confiscated, and he was forced into a monastery. His brilliant career ended in an instant. His fate was a brutal lesson in the unwritten rules of Byzantine power. An advisor could be gifted, loyal, and effective, but he could never be allowed to become more famous than the emperor he served. His success was his greatest vulnerability, a towering achievement that eventually cast a shadow the throne itself could no longer abide. A Byzantine princess was a political weapon, her hand in marriage a declaration of intent sealed not with a kiss but with a treaty. The empire frequently turned to dynastic marriage as its first line of defense, a way to secure a border or neutralize a rival without the cost and risk of a military campaign. A royal wedding could achieve what 10,000 soldiers could not. The Komnenian emperors, for instance, became masters of this strategy, weaving a vast web of marital alliances across the Christian world. They married their daughters, the celebrated Porphyrogenitos princesses, to foreign rulers from the Holy Roman Empire in the west to the powerful kingdoms of Georgia and the Crusader states in the east. Each bride who traveled to a foreign court was a living bridge, a permanent ambassador intended to bind that nation to Byzantine interests. She carried with her the immense prestige of the purple-born title, a cultural dazzle that often overwhelmed her new husband's court, and she was expected to serve as a constant, persuasive voice for the empire that sent her. Yet this seemingly brilliant strategy carried a terrible, inherent risk. A Byzantine princess could arrive in a foreign land as a symbol of peace, only to become the seed of a future war. Her children, half foreign by blood, would grow up hearing stories of their magnificent heritage in Constantinople. In a generation or two, that distant grandson, now a king or a duke in Italy or Hungary, could look east and decide that his mother's blood gave him a legitimate claim to the Byzantine throne itself. The very alliance designed to prevent conflict could plant the genealogical justification for an invasion decades later. This danger was not confined to the Christian West. In a stunning display of realpolitik, Byzantine emperors even negotiated marriages with their most formidable enemies, the Muslim Seljuk Turks. These were not love matches, but cold, calculated truces arranged between two powerful states. A Seljuk sultan might take a Byzantine noblewoman as a wife to solidify a peace treaty, granting the empire a desperately needed respite from relentless border raids. For a time, this would work, trade would flow, and the frontier would grow quiet. But such an alliance inevitably introduced a new and unpredictable faction into the already fractured court. The emperor who favored the Turkish alliance would be opposed by hardliners in the military and the church, who saw any pact with a non-Christian power as a betrayal of the empire's very soul. The court would split into pro-peace and pro-war parties, each vying for the emperor's ear, each accusing the other of treason. The foreign bride, whether from Germany or Anatolia, was never just a woman. She was a political earthquake whose aftershocks would rattle the palace for generations, proving that a treaty written in marriage vows could be far more dangerous than one written on parchment. A deposed emperor was a political ghost that could haunt a dynasty for decades. Forced into a monastery, his head shorn in the sacred tonsure, he was supposed to be politically dead, a soul dedicated to God and severed from the worldly concerns of the throne. But a man who had once worn the purple could never truly fade away. Within the quiet cloisters, he remained a potent symbol, a living, breathing alternative to the current regime. All it took was a whisper of discontent, a rumor of injustice, and that monastic cell could become the headquarters of a new rebellion. The exiled emperor was a blank slate upon which every dissatisfied general, every ambitious aristocrat, and every overtaxed citizen could project their hopes for a better future. His very existence was a threat, a constant reminder that the current ruler's hold on power was potentially temporary. This danger gave rise to one of the most bizarre and persistent phenomena in Byzantine history, the pretender. In a world without photographs, a charismatic impostor could claim to be a long-lost emperor, returning from exile or even from the dead to claim his rightful throne. The most famous case is that of Emperor Constantine VI, who was deposed and blinded by his own mother, the Empress Irene, in the year 797. He died soon after from his injuries, but his story did not end there. Years later, a handsome and convincing man appeared in the empire's eastern provinces, claiming to be Constantine VI, miraculously healed and returned to lead his people. He gathered a significant army of followers who believed his incredible tale, creating a serious military crisis for the government in Constantinople. The rebellion was only crushed when the impostor was captured and his true, humble identity was revealed. This was not an isolated incident. The court lived in constant fear of these political ghosts, these figures from the past who could be resurrected by clever actors to destabilize the present. It meant that deposing an emperor was only half the battle. Truly securing power required the systematic eradication of his memory, the silencing of his supporters, and the constant vigilance against anyone who might later invoke his name. The past was never a closed book in Byzantium. It was a weapon kept sharp and ready, waiting for the right hand to pick it up. A failed plot or a lost power struggle rarely ended in a clean, merciful death. For the high-born and the well-connected, the empire had far more creative and often crueler punishments in store. Exile was the most common of these fates, but it came in many forms, each designed to fit the crime and the status of the condemned. The most privileged political prisoners might find themselves sent to the Prince's Islands, a chain of small, picturesque islands in the Sea of Marmara, just a short boat ride from the glittering skyline of Constantinople. This was exile as a gilded cage. The air was clean, the views were stunning, and the accommodations in the villas were comfortable, even luxurious. But for a former emperor or a scheming courtier, this was a special kind of hell. Every day, they could look across the water and see the city they had lost, the palace they would never enter again, the throne room where their rivals now celebrated. They were close enough to taste the power they had lost, yet forever barred from touching it. It was a life of comfortable despair, a constant, aching reminder of what might have been. For others, the path led directly to the monastery, A forced tonsure was a standard procedure for a deposed emperor. His head was shaved, he was given a new, humble name, and he was made to swear vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. In an instant, the man who was once the absolute ruler of the known world became a lowly monk, answerable to an abbot. His new world was one of rigid routine, silent prayer, and manual labor. The vibrant silks and imperial purple were replaced by coarse, dark robes. The intricate ceremonies of the court gave way to the monotonous chanting of the psalms. This was not just a removal from power, it was the systematic destruction of a person's imperial identity. The empire was telling them, and everyone who knew them, that they were spiritually and politically dead. And then there was the most intimate prison of all, confinement within the great palace itself. Deep within that sprawling complex were chambers and towers reserved for the most dangerous prisoners of state, often rival family members. Here, a disgraced prince or a failed usurper could be kept in a comfortable apartment, but under constant guard, never allowed to leave. They lived in the very heart of power, surrounded by the sounds and smells of the court they could no longer influence, a ghost at the feast, a living secret hidden in the palace's deepest corridors. This form of punishment was a subtle psychological torture, forcing the prisoner to endure a perpetual mockery of the life they craved. So why choose these fates over a simple execution? A dead rival could become a martyr, a symbol around which future rebellions could coalesce. A living, breathing ex-emperor in a monastery, however, was a neutralized threat. His continued existence served as a daily lesson in the consequences of failure, a warning to every other ambitious soul in the empire. It proved that in Byzantium, the greatest punishment for losing the game was not death, but being forced to live with your defeat every single day for the rest of your life. The final emperor of the Romans knew his city was living on borrowed time. Constantine XI Palaiologos ruled a realm that was a ghost of its former self, little more than the great city itself and a few scattered outposts, surrounded by the ever-tightening grip of the young and ambitious Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II. As the massive Ottoman army assembled beyond the legendary Theodosian walls, Constantine made a desperate gamble, one that tore his remaining subjects apart. To secure military aid from the Catholic West, he formally agreed to a union between the Orthodox Church of Constantinople and the papacy in Rome. For many of his citizens and clergy, this was a betrayal worse than defeat. They would rather be ruled by the Turkish Sultan, they declared, than see their ancient faith compromised by the Latin cross. The very theological pride and independence that had defined the empire for 1,000 years now prevented it from accepting the one lifeline that might have saved it. The promised Western reinforcements were pitifully small, a handful of ships and soldiers against an overwhelming force. The final act of the empire's long drama came down to a single, infamous gate, the Kirkaporta. After a siege of weeks, under relentless cannon fire and countless assaults, a small postern gate was either left open by negligence or opened by betrayal. Through that tiny opening, the Ottoman troops poured into the city. Emperor Constantine, refusing to flee, tore off his imperial regalia and charged into the oncoming tide, dying in the fighting, his body never identified. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was not merely a military defeat. It was the final, tragic fulfillment of the patterns that had defined Byzantine power for a millennium. In the end, the empire was brought down not just by an external enemy, but by the internal divisions, the theological disputes, and the whispered betrayals that had always been the true rulers of the palace. The intricate game of thrones had finally reached its last bloody move. The strategies perfected in the gilded halls of Constantinople never truly vanished, they simply evolved. The intricate dance of power, betrayal, and information control that defined the Byzantine court finds startling echoes in our modern political landscapes. Consider the unelected official who wields immense influence from the shadows. Today, we might call them a chief of staff, a senior advisor, or a spin doctor. In Byzantium, they were the eunuchs and the logothetes. These figures, then and now, often hold power not from a public mandate, but through their unparalleled access to the leader and their control over the flow of information. A modern advisor who shapes policy, filters the news a leader sees, and manages the political agenda is operating on the same principles as a Basil Lekapenos, who ruled for decades by controlling the emperor's bedchamber and the imperial treasury. The tools have changed from handwritten scrolls to digital dashboards, but the objective remains identical: to shape reality for the person in power. The political backstabbing that toppled emperors also has its contemporary equivalent. A modern leadership challenge, a vote of no confidence, or a sudden cabinet reshuffle driven by internal party rivalries is the direct descendant of a Byzantine palace coup. The mechanics are less bloody, of course, but the core dynamics are unchanged. Rivals still form factions, they still cut deals in corridors and meeting rooms, and they still work to isolate a leader, making them vulnerable before making their final move. The goal is still to seize control, not with a dagger, but with a majority vote or a devastating leak to the press. And what of the grand public ceremonies, the controlled imagery, and the strategic leaks? The Byzantine emperor, who presented himself as God's chosen ruler through magnificent processions and perfectly minted coins, was a master of propaganda. Today, that same instinct drives meticulously staged political rallies, carefully curated social media feeds, and the relentless spin designed to shape public perception. Controlling the narrative is as crucial now as it was then. The emperor had his court poets and his golden solidus. The modern leader has their communication team and their television ads. Both understand that power is not just about making decisions, but about controlling the story those decisions tell. Why does this ancient history matter now? Because the Byzantine Empire serves as a grand, thousand-year case study in the timeless nature of power. It teaches us that the players and the stage may change, but the fundamental game remains the same. Human ambition, the thirst for influence, and the methods used to gain and keep control are constants. By understanding the intricate, often brutal, political world of Byzantium, we gain a deeper lens through which to view the machinations in our own capitals and corporate headquarters. The names and the titles are different, but the silent, strategic war for power continues. That intricate dance of power, played out over 1,000 years, leaves us with a stark and enduring legacy. The Byzantine Court was an engine driven by a single, relentless fuel: the pursuit of control over the richest city on earth. From the throne room to the spymaster's den, every action was calculated, every alliance temporary, and every loyalty suspect. We saw how empresses like Theodora ruled from the shadows of the women's quarters, their influence shaping military strategy and religious doctrine with a whisper. We witnessed the unique authority of the eunuchs, men like Basil Lekapenos, who commanded armies and treasuries precisely because they could never legally claim the crown, turning their perceived flaw into the ultimate political strength. Faith and power were forever intertwined, with patriarchs and emperors locked in a constant struggle where a theological disagreement could topple a regime as surely as a foreign army. And underpinning it all was a chilling pragmatism, where blinding a rival was considered a merciful alternative to murder, a strategic move to neutralize a threat without creating a martyr. This was a world where survival demanded a mastery of deception, where the grandest public ceremony could hide the most vicious private conspiracy. So we are left with one final, haunting question. In a world of such intricate deception, who would you have trusted? Would you have placed your faith in the Varangian Guard's paid loyalty, in the whispered intelligence of a eunuch spymaster, or in the ambitious cunning of an empress? Let us know in the comments which figure or which plot from this real-life Game of Thrones you found the most fascinating. And if you want to join us as we unravel more mysteries from the ancient world, be sure to subscribe.